My name is Kristi. I'm the host of Giving Tree Surrogacy's podcast From Bump to Bond. Tonight, we have the pleasure of speaking with Stephanie Fierro, licensed mental health counselor. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you. This is our first live episode. So thank you for joining and bearing with us for any, can you hear me now type comments. So I think it sounds okay to me now. I think if you're still able to hear, we'll go ahead and jump in. So this is not meant to be a lecture. This is really just an open conversation about the importance of, preparing for the mental side of a journey, a surrogacy journey. And Stephanie has experience talking with intended parents and surrogates as well in preparing for a journey and working through any kind of challenges that might come up in a journey. So Stephanie, before we dive in, can you share a little bit about why the emotional side of surrogacy is so important as a mental health counselor, and what made you focus on this space?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So, emotional readiness, there's so many parts to surrogacy, right? There's the medical clearance, and there's the legal clearance or approvals, agreements, and all those things can go right. But emotionally, right, we also have to make sure that we are feeling ready and stable enough to move forward, right? So that we have better outcomes, right? And we feel better and the journey is enjoyable. But I'll take it back to, why I'm in this space. I worked matching intended parents and with surrogates for some time, while also being a licensed mental health counselor. And so once I got into the space and I started doing matching, and then, there was this evaluation component to it. And I figured, wow, I can mix the two. And here I am. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. But yeah, right. Emotional readiness, it really determines how fulfilling that experience is going to be. So, what does that mean, right? When we talk about it. First, we talk about, what is your being really self-aware of what your motivation to surrogacy is, right? Do you really understand what your motivation is? And let's be clear on that, right? Because there's so much uncertainty in surrogacy. And we want to make sure that, if you have a certain motivation that's driving, making sure that may not be the end, right? That goal, you may not achieve that goal. What is your ability to tolerate uncertainty, right? This is a process that there's ups and downs, right? And how do we handle that? Because we can't guarantee anything. And so it's really figuring out, okay, how do you manage, right? How do you cope? What does communication look like? Do we have healthy communication skills? And are we really good at boundary setting? Because this is an emotional process, right? Where we're connecting with another human, right? Or humans, if it's, more than one intended parent. And so we want to make sure that we're setting boundaries. There's another relationship that we're going to be having. And also, how do I regulate, right? Emotional regulation. How do I regulate myself when things go sideways? So that's really what we're looking at when we're talking about emotional readiness.
Mm-hmm. And having that foundation before you get started, I think, is really important, so that you have, like they say, all the tools in the toolkit, so that if something does, you hit a bump in the road and something happens, that you have the ability to say, okay, let's take a breath and work through this together. So can you speak a little bit about the importance of just the emotional preparedness for surrogates or intended parents going into it?
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, right, it's 100, you just nailed it, really, right? It's being able to understand that there may be setbacks. I mean, we all want this to be a, super smooth, positive experience.
Yes.
But us in the surrogacy, in third party reproduction, we know that isn't always the case, right?
Mhm.
Intended parents too, right? A lot of them that are coming to seek a surrogate already know that too. They're right that
Mhm.
the uncertainty and that there's setbacks, and so really hearing, sometimes like during the evaluation, we talk about, I'm getting personal history, right, on the surrogate, and really figuring out, what struggles have you gone through and how did you manage that? And
Mhm.
so, one of the things that I think is so important, like sometimes, we surrogates always, anybody, right? It's like they may feel like it's a job interview, or like, I hate to
We
relate it
hear
to
that
that,
a lot. Yes.
but you want to do good. You're like, they come in here, they're really committed to this process, and so they want to do good, and they're like, I am perfect. And I'm like, we are not perfect, and that's
Right.
okay, right? It
Yes.
is okay. We have ups, we have downs, and so
Mhm.
it's figuring out, how do we manage when that happens, right? That's what
Mhm.
we really want to know. When it
Yes.
goes sideways, how do we handle? um because it can be overwhelming, right? It could be really overwhelming. And, one of the things that we look at, and I guess, maybe we can even start talking about the process, right? And what is the evaluation, which I don't want to call it evaluation. I call it more of like a psychoeducational session,
Yeah.
right? Because I tell surrogates, this isn't just like, are you passing or failing, right? The purpose of it is to really make sure that, um, one, we understand what your coping skills are, what your support system looks like, and two, that you are aware of all the risks that are going, that you're taking on.
Yeah.
And so there's all that. But going back to, really what the screening process may look like, you know, again, communication style, what does conflict resolution look like, right? Because there's
Mhm.
always, people, and especially if we have, if there is a partner involved, we bring them into the room too, right? And how do you guys resolve conflict, right? What does that look like? Um, we evaluate the relationship stability. What does the support look like? Um, you know, family, their personal and family mental health history. Um, and obviously any substance use, those all those things, the medical questions, I guess, that we'll talk about too.
Yeah.
um, and so yeah, really that's what the process looks like.
And
And then there's, go ahead.
I'm glad that you said what a lot of women ask beforehand. They get kind of nervous and refer to it as an evaluation, and it's kind of hard to find the right word for it. But what you're describing is more about us getting to know you more as a person, things that you've gone through in your life, challenges, ups and downs. And it's not about being a perfect person or that you haven't gone through anything. If anything, I mean, we've seen some of our most dedicated, amazing surrogates that have had, challenges in their life, and they have developed such resiliency. And so they end up being just such great surrogates because they're understanding of the intended parent struggles
Mhm.
in their own way. And so it really is more than an evaluation. It's a kind of get to know you opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I always try to tell them that too, so that they're not nervous.
Yeah.
Um, because it could feel that way, right?
Mhm.
There already so much pressure, right? They already have so much pressure
Yeah.
of there's so many steps along the way, and they really want to, um, you know, paint themselves in the best light, which of course, it's understandable in
Right.
this situation. But you're right. It is, it's almost better to know that you've gone through some stuff, and that you managed, and how you coped.
Right.
And, it gets very intimate, right? We talk about, abuse, and that can be hard to discuss.
Mhm.
It's hard to discuss and disclose, really. And so, or even postpartum depression at all, or anxiety, any prior hospitalizations, right? Or any intimate partner violence relationship that they might have been in. Those are hard to discuss, and really hearing the stories and hearing how they've overcome and cope is is great for them in terms of healing, right? To be able to talk about it, but also to hear, from where I stand, to hear the resilience, right? The resilience, because going back to surrogacy, right? There could be setbacks, and seeing how resilient they are, it is helpful, right? It's really helpful to know.
Yeah. So let's talk about intended parents. Many come to this process carrying grief, fear, feelings of guilt. I've heard that one too. Can you talk about what emotions you feel are most common that you hear, and how do those feelings show up in the early stages of a surrogacy journey?
Yeah, you're right, right? It's like a mix of emotions. They're grieving, right? They're grieving not being able to carry, and that's very difficult. There's a fear, right? Like, I can't carry my baby. How will I bond with my baby? And that's hard. That can be, and there's ways to bond, right? And we can talk about those, but anxiety about having limited control, I would say that's a big one, right?
Yeah.
Because now I have to trust someone that they are going to do everything in the best interest of this baby, and I am nowhere near, right? And that's a lot of control to give to someone. And so that's a big one. And then just, guilt too, right? Guilt that they can't do it, and that someone else has to do it. And so really, what I recommend is for intended parents to process that, right? Like, have the time and the space to process that before starting this journey. It doesn't mean you're healed, right? You're not going to heal.
Exactly.
But you want to enter surrogacy it, a little more prepared, right? You want to have more tools, because that also brings, again, going back to uncertainty and not knowing what will happen. You want to be ready for that, because if you're not, then it feels like 10 times heavier. It already felt heavy, right? And going into this and not working through that, or even maybe being in therapy alongside, right? The journey.
Absolutely.
It's definitely helpful, for sure.
What are signs that intended parents may not be ready to dive into it just yet? It's maybe not a never, it's a I'm not ready yet. And how do I get there? What are the signs for you that they aren't ready yet?
Yeah. Control, a lot of control is definitely one of them, right? That can show up in so many ways, from the smallest things. And that's a big sign. There can be preferences, for sure, that intended parents have.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I would love, instead of using this prenatal, can you use this prenatal? But then when you see a lot of control of, what you're having for breakfast and dinner, and what time you're going to sleep, and just, trying to put on their entire routine onto a surrogate, that can be a form of control. Also, having a hard time choosing a surrogate.
Not
That can
wanting
be
to pull the trigger.
not
And
wanting to
saying,
pull the trigger.
yeah.
And I think that's the biggest one, right? Not wanting to that's a clear sign, I would say, that they're not ready.
Yeah.
And shouldn't really force it, really.
Yeah. It can show up in misbalance of preferences, like you
Yeah.
referenced, of
Yes.
having preferences of, I prefer a surrogate that lives in this state because of the favorable laws for our legal work that we need, or, things like that. But it's very challenging to give up that control. You've already lost that
Yeah.
feeling of control and not carrying, and then to trust what's seeming like a stranger.
Yeah.
And it's such a huge leap. And so being prepared mentally for those challenges of all of those feelings, I think continuing therapy alongside that has been very helpful for intended parents that I've worked with. And so many have continued that, and I think that that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Focusing on being open-minded to the process and learning who their surrogate is as a person, her family. I've seen just beautiful relationships form from that, but it takes a lot. It takes work, and maybe having a partner or a primary support person that either the surrogate or the intended parent or intended parents go to instead of the other party in their
Mhm.
journey, to just have someone on the outside that you can talk to and say things that maybe you wouldn't say directly to the surrogate or to the intended parents. Just having an extra outlet, I think, is really important.
100%. Yeah, yeah. And talking about like the relationship with the surrogate and intended parents trying to build that relationship, that is also a way to bond with their child, right? When they think about
Yeah.
the fear of like, I'm not going to bond, that's a good way to bond. Really building that relationship, going to the appointments, trying to be there. And I know it's not feasible for everybody, right? I'm also realistic, but
Right.
whether it's FaceTime, hearing, now they have those like buds that you can record or
Yes,
send them
the belly
links.
buds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all these sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
To bond with their baby, and of course, nurturing
Mhm.
will come after, and that's a way to bond as well.
Yeah. At what point would you say, for intended parents that worry about connecting with their surrogate, or that they won't connect with the baby once the baby is born because they didn't carry, how do you respond and help intended parents work through those feelings of connecting to the baby throughout the pregnancy as well as when the baby's born?
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, right, like trying to stay as involved as possible
Hmm.
with the surrogate is important. And also really reminding intended parents that although yes, there's an experience, right, that they are missing out on, but how do we stay focused on the experience you will have when the baby gets here,
Yeah.
which is hard. It could be hard for them, right, because they've
Mhm.
been trying, and so, but really trying to reframe it, right, refocus. Let's focus on
Yeah.
what's true today. Let's think about what's true today. What's true today is that, your surrogate is 20 weeks pregnant. You guys are 20 weeks pregnant. In 20 weeks, you will have a baby to hold, right? And
Yeah.
so really kind of bringing them back to what their goal is,
Yeah.
and sometimes, and this, sometimes we want something, we want this goal, and this is the avenue that we are like, this is the avenue I need to take to get to that goal. And unfortunately, that can't be the avenue. We can get to this goal. It might look a little different. The avenue looks different. And so
Yeah.
really bringing it back to that is important.
Yeah, I like that. That just the avenue looks different. That's
Yeah.
impactful. Um, I want to just share on screen a QR code for anyone, whether you're a potential intended parent or a potential surrogate, and you're interested in learning more, speaking with one of our staff members to learn more about becoming an intended parent with Giving Tree or as a surrogate to carry for an intended parent through our program. You can scan this QR code and it will take you right to an application and you can be connected with a staff member. So I just wanted to share that. All right. So next, I think if we can kind of cover what drives surrogates, a lot of intended parents kind of question this sometimes, that what would not possess a woman, but what is the driving force behind someone who wants to carry a baby for another person? And that's kind of a hot topic sometimes. There are people that that may say that it's only for financial motivation. And that's discussed in this screening as well, in this
Mhm.
evaluation, if you will,
Yeah.
of just the motivations that what brought you to surrogacy. Can you kind of talk about what are the most emotionally healthy reasons why a woman or a person may pursue becoming a surrogate?
Yeah. You know, what I see is those that are many of the women that are pursuing surrogacy, they have a lot of empathy, right? It's for pro-social like values and a desire to just to really help others.
Mhm.
And you'll see that, right? When I'm having this conversation with them, there's other ways that I hear about them helping others, whether that's adopting or fostering, or coming from or being adopted themselves, right? And feeling like they want to give, right, the same way that they were given. And so you really do see a lot of that. They have like this like caregiving natural aspect.
Nurturers, like, yeah.
Yeah, like nurturers and really wanting to help.
Mhm.
Um, and so, and a lot of them have had great pregnancies, like experiences, right? And so they're, what I do hear a lot is when I had I can't imagine someone not going through that, right? Like I can't imagine someone not having that joy, and I want to give that to someone. And if I have the opportunity to do it, I want to do it.
Mhm.
And so I hear that a lot. And those are great motivations, right? Great motivations. There is a concern about compensation, right? And I think it is a hot topic, and we talk about it, right? And I always say, let's talk about the money, right? Because
Mhm.
there is money involved, and we shouldn't um, disregard it, right? And so that is part of the screening process, right? What is their financial situation? Are they thinking about surrogacy as you know, uh, a way to not get evicted from their house,
Right.
or or they're not, they don't have a job and haven't been working for a while and really just don't have a way to support themselves and are only like banking on this.
Mhm.
Those are concerning, and so we definitely screen for that to make sure, because again, this is not guaranteed, right? And so
Yeah.
really saying, hey, this doesn't mean that you will, get fully
It can be
compensated.
a long process
Yeah.
of, you know, a journey before they would see compensation. And so, I refer to it as something that should be something that enriches your life. So thinking of, I've heard all kinds of things. I want to go back to school and get my master's degree. I want
Mhm.
to use that as a down payment on a car or a house, or, whatever plans that they have. Those are good signs and things that we want to hear. Like you said, not something that is an immediate need, an
Yes.
immediate financial need there, because it can be a long process. A journey is typically 18 months long from application to actually delivering. We say that, over the next year and a half or 2 years,
Mhm.
you would want to be invested in this process. And hopefully it goes quicker than that, but there can be bumps in the road, and it does delay, the end result of a journey. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and we talk about that. I always ask, well, do you expect any major life changes in the next 2 years, right? Because
yeah.
it could be a long, it's a long commitment, and even as fast as we can go, right? It can take some time, but then you can have a failed first transfer, and so now, it's taking longer. So yeah, definitely, really, really highlighting this is not. You're not going to be compensated immediately, and if
Mhm.
that's the expectation, then let's clear that up.
Yes. Yes.
um, and to the point of expectation, right? Like that's really what the eval is about too, right? Like
Mhm.
really hearing what they're expecting and saying, well, let's think about that a little more.
Mhm. What would you, how would you respond to a woman who is nervous about wanting to keep the baby, that's a big question for a lot of people. They say, how can you do this and then give up the baby? How do you talk through that with women through the screening process?
Yeah. So that is, I think intended parents probably worry about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Will they give up the baby? And it is natural to attach, right? In a way, it is natural to, and I wouldn't even say attach, but they're invested, right? A surrogate is
Yeah.
invested. They're invested. They want this to work out. And so at this point, I think, to an intended parent, I would say, they're just a protector and the caregiver right now. There's no ownership. And a lot of surrogates actually think about it that way too. I am just here to, I've heard everything, right? I'm the
Yeah.
oven, I
Yeah.
am everything. And so really, surrogates, we talk about attachment, right? Like, how do you know you won't be attached? And, you know, interesting enough, going back to the bonding question about, an intended parent not caring, I've heard a lot of surrogates say, actually, the bonding for me happened after I had my baby, like once my baby was born, and that can happen, right?
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting. I mean,
That
everybody's
is
experience.
very interesting and
Yeah.
really nice, I think, for intended parents to hear that too, that surrogates do experience that even in their own pregnancies with a biological baby, that they said afterwards is when I actually bonded the most.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is great. I think it's, I would say the surrogates really just feel a sense of responsibility. And so um, they don't typically fear attachment. And if they do, right, they've thought about it and they think about, well, I have my support system, which we go over, right? Who is your support system? Who do you call? What would you do? Let's talk about that. What would happen if you start, there's going to be fluctuations of emotions afterwards, right? After
Mhm.
pregnancy in general. But how do you know that something else that it's deeper, right? Like, are you able to talk about it? Who will you reach out to? And, surrogates are moms, right? And so really bring your kid closer, right? And hug
Yeah.
your child and spend more time with your child during that time.
Mhm. What about feelings of judgment? If they feel like they may be judged if they're a surrogate, and whether it's the types of intended parents they're caring for, or some people just don't agree with surrogacy in general. And how do women speak to that in their evaluation?
Yeah. What I'll say to that is that women that already are, if they're sitting there, they already have a strong sense of self.
Yeah.
They understand that some people will jump. Surrogacy is controversial, right? And so if they're sitting here, they already have some, sense of self and believe in what they're doing. And so, yeah, right, there will be judgment. And does that necessarily mean you're unfit? No, right? And just it's really going to come down to how they can protect themselves and their well-being, right? What does their self-esteem look like? That's important, right?
Mhm.
Because if if we are concerned about what others are saying, you know, and you've struggled with self-esteem, then I would be worried.
Yeah. And to know going into it that there could be that, and it's probably crossed their mind already.
Yes.
And, with, like you said, they've already gotten this far. And so they likely have thought about it and have their own independent thoughts, aside from the outside noise and chatter about it sometimes. But it's just
Yeah.
good for just in the preparedness, I think, of before you get into a journey to know that may come up, and how you will respond to that. Or maybe you don't respond to that. But
Mhm, mhm. And one of the things, some and everybody approaches it differently, right? It depends
Mhm.
on who's around you, who your family is, who your community is, and most people know that, right? Like they know who they're surrounded by. And so, we talk about, well, who knows that you're doing this, right? Who have you talked to? Who supports you? And sometimes, surrogates, so I have not told my mom or my dad, but I'll tell them once I know for sure, because there's going to be so many questions, and I know that at the end they'll support me. But they, a lot of them actually don't, if they know that somebody's going to judge them, they just don't say anything to them, to not fog, their thinking and interrupt their process. And so, and that can work for some, right? What's important is your spouse, your partner or whoever you live with. Are they supportive? Whoever is very close to you and you are interacting with every day, are they supportive? But most people know, right? Like you kind of know, I know I can tell this person, or I shouldn't tell this person my plan until it's done. And then I can't change my mind.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense, that some people that you just want to have all the information or want to know that it's for sure moving forward before you share, and you have more in your arsenal to respond to any questions and have more information, so that it doesn't come off as just this idea I've been kind of considering, that you really are serious and have all the information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going back to the screening itself, the evaluation itself, as we said earlier, women can feel like that's kind of intimidating. Can you walk everyone through what it actually looks like? Are there certain things that right off the bat you can kind of tell this is going to be great, this is really going well, or any kind of things that you may say, okay, this is definitely not going to be something that we can move forward with?
Well, that's a lot, but we'll talk about the process, right? And so, again, right, it's not even so much to like eliminate somebody from the process. It's more about preparing them, right? And so there's a personality assessment that is part of it. And so I'll start with that because that's the easiest thing. It's about 324 questions, and which I tell
really sounds like a lot.
It's a lot. I know. When I first tell them, and they're like, "Oh my God," and I'm like, "It's easy though. It is very easy."
Yes.
Because it's about you. It's about you and your personality. And so, one thing I always say, like, just be truthful. Answer to whatever comes to mind first. That should be your answer. However you truly feel, because if you're not honest and consistent, then we can see that. And so that's very important, right? Like even going back to, just really being honest, it's definitely important in this process, right? Talking about trust, right? Intended parents trusting. So we need to see that. But there's the PAI or MMPI, depending on who they're being evaluated by. It can be a different a tool, but I use the PAI. So we'll talk about, again, right, I'll go over it really quickly. Communication style. How do you tolerate conflict? What are your coping skills, right? What do you do when you're stressed out? What is the most stressful thing that's going on in your life right now? Understanding their relationship. If they are in a relationship, understanding that, or the relationship with whoever their support system is. Having a support system here is so important, and that doesn't necessarily mean a partner, right? So like single women are great surrogates.
I'm so glad you said that does come up.
Oh yeah, they are great. I mean,
yes.
I can go on about single moms, right? Like they are great, they've managed and they're doing amazing. And so support doesn't necessarily mean a partner, right? Because even a partner, just because you have a partner doesn't mean you're supported also, right? And so, what does that support system look like? What do your boundaries look like? What do you understand? And that's really important, right? So going back to, it's not so much about eliminating you, it's more about figuring out, can you setting you up for success, right? We
Mhm.
want to be able, can you advocate for yourself? If you feel uncomfortable, how do you manage? Because we don't want surrogates going through this process feeling uncomfortable the whole time.
Yeah.
Because then then we're talking, how does that translate postpartum? And we want to make sure that we set, surrogates are set up for success, right? And try to, nobody can say for sure if you're going to get postpartum depression or anxiety, and but we can do our best. Like, let's put all the safety measures in place,
Mhm.
to make sure that you'll be okay.
And
Um,
during the journey too of, if
yeah,
something comes up and you aren't seeing eye to eye, about even just little stuff with the intended parents, because we call it a journey for a reason. It is a journey. It's, there's the great moments, but if something does come up and happen, and, if there's a miscarriage, everyone is processing that in their own way. A surrogate, it is a loss for her, it's a loss for the intended parents in different ways, and how do they work through that together and separately. So the preparedness, I think, is really important.
100%. And that's one thing that I really enjoy about joint sessions, when you bring the intended parents and the surrogate together, because although those sorts of views on termination are discussed, right? I'll use that
Mhm.
example. They're discussed
Yeah.
during the marriage call, right? But you guys, you don't really get into it, right? And so in the joint session, we talk about, well, how would you like, the surrogate to communicate that to you?
Yeah.
Typically, how do you communicate? Do you need some time? Do you need some time to process? Are you someone that needs to talk it through and just keep talking, right? And understanding that about each other is so helpful, right? It really, because there will be these bumps, and it won't be, termination or a miscarriage, but it could be, something else, something simple,
Mhm.
vitamins, something, right?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
it's being able to hear how they like to communicate and what they need when they are feeling overwhelmed
Mhm.
is important. I think it's so great.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, going back to the screening, right, or the eval, what is your history in terms of mental health, right? Have you been to therapy before? Have you been to couples counseling? Any postpartum depression? And that isn't necessarily bad. It's like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. How was it for you? What were the circumstances? What was going on? How has that life changed since then? um, did you have medication? Did you have any treatment? That's also not bad, right? And so going back to, this is a time to really be honest about the process is important, right? Because it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you need to be perfect. It's more about like, yeah, I went through that and I did A, B, and C to get better, and I did great, and I learned, A, B, and C from it as also.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and
And
that's
it
so important.
prepares for as safe of a journey and post birth for her, as possible, to set her up for success. And like you said, it's not about disqualifying someone. It's just to ensure that um, we're all being safe as possible, because you can't predict, if someone will experience postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety. But as much as you can prepare in case something does come up, that she feels like she has the support. She's used other tools in the past that have helped her.
Mhm.
So all of those things may come up, and it's not necessarily a disqualifier.
Right.
I know we've talked about, if medication was prescribed, that they took the medication and, for a few months and then felt better. That is okay. And they
Mhm.
were following doctor's instructions, and learned certain ways to cope and manage. So,
Yeah, yeah. You bring up a really good point, which is, can you follow doctor's orders, right? And we all have a right to not to not, right? Um,
right.
but I would say, like, if I give you an example of a concerning one, right, it would be, you have two kids and you had postpartum both times and you didn't really take your medication both times. Um, and so, then that's really concerning, right? Because
Mhm.
may have it again. And, I think all of us in this space have a sense of responsibility too, right? For how the surrogate does afterwards. And so, um, that's something that we watch out for.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For intended parents, what are some of the most common emotional challenges that they should prepare for?
Um, you know, one of them I would say is, in the appointments, right? Sometimes they might get a sense of not being able to make medical decisions themselves in that moment right there, not being able to be at the appointments and learning right first, like in the moment. Of
Mhm.
course there's always open communication and they get that, but it's more about like in that moment that they're missing out on, the fear, right, of the distance and not being around, the surrogate or carrying the baby, how that's going to impact their connection. That's definitely one of them. And really the biggest one is trusting the surrogate, right? That's a really big one, um, because it is hard, like you said, right? Like it's a stranger for all intended purposes. It's somebody that, you don't really know that well, and so that's the biggest, and going back to how can you tell if an intended parent is ready? Can I trust this person? It's hard. I don't know,
Very hard.
what
Yeah.
is that, and what does trust mean, right? Um, and some intended parents really say, you've been pregnant before, you have healthy babies. I trust that this, what you need to do. Um, but trust can look very different for everyone, and so figuring that out is important,
Mhm.
for intended parents, and figuring out, can I do that?
Mhm. And continuing to nurture that relationship with the surrogate to build trust as well throughout the journey.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
What about surrogates' emotional hurdles that tend to come up for them throughout the pregnancy? Are there things that come to mind?
um the possible, like disappointments of, a failed transfer or a miscarriage, those are really big, and those are, we talk about that, right? And during our evaluation, one of them is like family judgment, and we already talked about that. Hormonal changes postpartum, right? That definitely expecting that. And how do we prepare? Like, what do you have in place? What do you need to be in place, to manage that? And just the responsibility, like they're, I have this huge responsibility, of this baby, right? I'm protecting someone's baby. And so
Yeah.
that's, they're carrying that every day, throughout their pregnancy. So, um, figuring out what are the coping skills, what are some things that you're doing to ground you every day so that you can manage and go through these emotions and not, it'll come to your mind for sure, but how do we make sure that it doesn't rise to a level where it's impacting you and your
Yeah.
everyday?
Do you have certain tips that you would suggest for keeping someone grounded through a really difficult, maybe it is a failed transfer, how both surrogates and intended parents can use tips that would keep them feeling, okay, I'm processing this, but we are going to continue moving forward and get back on track and have that moment and then move forward. How do they bridge that?
Yeah, it's, it is allowing themselves to have that moment, right? To really, and that's why we go back to, if the, How do you manage when you're going through a difficult time? That can look different for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people really, you need to be alone. I need a couple of days. I need to process on my own. Some people need to process with someone else. And so that's why, having that conversation about what would that look like for you is important, so that we know this is what this person needs.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, one of my favorite things and like questions is like the here and now, and like what is true today, right? I mentioned it earlier, and that same thing, right? Like what is true today? This happened, um, and that's today, but tomorrow is different, right? And it doesn't need to be tomorrow that we jump back into it, but it can be
Mm-hmm.
later on. Allow yourself to have those feelings. Allow yourself. One of the things that I really try to tell surrogates during the evaluation is that this is science too, right? And so we really talk about like field transfer. You did everything you could, right? You did
Yeah.
everything you could, and that could happen. And how can we start thinking about it is not our fault, right? Same thing with miscarriages. And so really talking through that. And I try to kind of set them up a little bit, so that they understand, because they have this sense of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it can be very hard on them, and feeling that disappointed the intended parents, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's a lot too.
Even through exciting milestones, I felt like that as a surrogate. In the early stages, I was so excited and felt so optimistic about next steps, and I found out that I was pregnant. I took at-home pregnancy tests, and we were still waiting on the beta results, and I had a suspicion that the transfer took, and I wanted to share that with them, but I also recognized that they are coming from a different place, and so they may have met those milestones in the past and then still did not come home with a baby. And so it can be just a different perspective of how to share excitement too, of like,
Yes.
I want to share this, but I don't want to upset them or make them feel like, okay, well, we've heard this before and it was still a letdown in the end.
Mhm.
And so I think, for surrogates, they've come from, the reason why they're medically pre-approved is because they've had a healthy pregnancy history. And so they haven't come from that medical history that
Yeah.
intended parents have. And I think understanding that going into it, so even if they're not sharing in the excitement of just understanding, I think, where the intended parents are coming from is important.
Yes, yes, that's such a good point, right? Um, and that goes back to almost setting like expectation with relationship. That's something we talk about too. Like, what is your expectation of the relationship with you and the intended parents?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because that plays into that, right? Are they going to check on me? Do they want because surrogates are
Mm-hmm.
excited. They're like, I want to
Yeah,
text you every day
they're
and
so
tell you
excited.
everything. And so, but we're like, hold on. Well, let's,
Mm-hmm.
let's see where the intended parents are. And vice versa too, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that's a really good point, because then really setting that expectation. Because I'm sure, I mean, you didn't send the text or let them know, but if
Mm-hmm.
you do and they don't respond with the same excitement, right? Then now you're feeling uncertain,
Yes. Yeah.
and we don't want that, right? Where as a surrogate, you need to be in the best mental space, right? Because that
Mm-hmm.
will really be the best outcome for the baby and for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? As
Yeah.
a surrogate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to share the QR code again. Again, if you are a potential intended parent or a potential surrogate interested in this journey, you can scan this QR code here on your screen. I think it's also in the comments. There is a link there that you can apply and be connected to one of our staff members. and it will ask you if you're a potential intended parent or a potential surrogate to be connected to the right staff member. So again, you can scan that code or click the link in the comments. Right.
You know, I was just thinking, I'm like using the word like eliminated. I've been watching Squid Games.
Oh,
Off top.
the challenge one or the show?
The challenge one.
Okay, yeah. I
Disqualified. I'm sorry. Yeah, you know, I'm over here
yes,
in Squid Game world. But anyways.
that's so funny. My daughter and I watched the first season. We're waiting for all of the episodes of season 2 to be released so that we can watch it
Yeah.
all and just binge it.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
we definitely watch that too.
for you and all the viewers, the final episode came out yesterday or Tuesday. So if anybody wants to go watch it,
I think this weekend we will be we will be binging that.
yeah.
Yes. Let's see. So the emotional challenges, I know that we kind of touched on this with every journey, kind of having highs and lows. For intended parents, what are some of the most common emotional challenges they should prepare for?
Well, those are the ones, you know, that we talked about, right? Like really
Mhm.
the anxiety, disappointment, right? Loss of control,
Yeah.
difficulty trusting. Those are definitely difficult, right?
Mhm.
To go to manage. And that's why really therapy would be helpful, right? Or having
Yeah.
that third party that you can talk about it with, because even like sometimes if it's a couple, right, intended parents, it's hard there, you know, for them to even talk to each other. Sometimes that can be
Mhm.
a big load because they're both experience it different too.
Yeah. And like I said, even with good news, I know I've heard it before. Like with my own journey, I was hesitant to share good news. I've heard this many times in other journeys that we've supported where they feel like, I just can't breathe yet until the baby is in my arms. I can't fully relax, and that's okay. I've heard that many times, and just managing that as much as possible. What are ways that you can um, let yourself open up to the process as much as you can, and find little pockets of, ways that you can be excited and let yourself feel all of the emotions, even though that can be scary to let the excitement in, and get excited. I know I've heard it before. They don't want to jinx things by celebrating milestones and things like that. Any tips? Have you heard that on your end of things? I'm sure.
Yes, yes. And again, it is difficult for everyone, right? I think the going back to intended parents and how to prepare for this, really therapy, right? I would say that
Mhm.
one, because there's a disappointment, right? But I also, you know, there is this pain that they're dealing with. And one thing we want to make sure is, you know, of course, the baby is going to bring a lot of joy, but it's not going to, it may not necessarily make that pain go away either, right? And
Yeah.
so really thinking, right, really thinking, especially families that have been trying for a while, right, or
Mhm.
have had multiple losses. And so sometimes they can think, oh, this could have been my fourth child, this could have been my fifth child, right? And so really sometimes it's best to, everybody knows how they navigate things, right? And I think the best thing that we can do is support intended parents where in the best way that we can. And if they're saying, I call me at the 20-week, you know, or call me, you know, then can we honor that, right? Can we honor that? But also making sure, do they have the support that they need? And then what I would say with that too is that when it comes to matching, let's make sure that we're matching with a surrogate who's okay with that too, right? Who's okay with, the intended parent doesn't want to hear from me from, 20, and I'm just using that example, right? Because you
Yeah.
mentioned, but, and that's why that's important too, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's making sure that we can just honor that and make it as smooth for everyone as possible.
Yeah. And another thing that came to mind, even after delivery, you mentioned a little bit about that for intended parents that, it may not heal what you've gone through. It may not, you finally have your baby and that was the end goal, but it doesn't change the path that you had to take to get to that point. And it doesn't change the fact that that's how you had to have a child. And there's still potentially that feeling of grief. And I think too, another thing I've heard is the struggle of now they're parents, not intended parents anymore, but parents that go through surrogacy and then challenges after the baby's born, and they feel like they can't complain or vent about it, that it's hard to have a newborn because people say, well, this is what you wanted. You've been working towards this for years. And so then they feel like they can't even say, I'm tired, or my baby's colicky and it's pretty miserable. And just knowing that that's okay, because it doesn't matter how you had your baby. If you had a surrogate or carried your baby, having a newborn is difficult, and that's okay to say and
Yes.
feel those feelings.
100%, 100%. And you know what? Their support system will be so important, right? Finding their tribe is important, and making sure that they're surrounding themselves with people that uplift them, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I always,
Yes.
one thing I always, with all therapy clients, I always say, like, we pay attention to how people make us feel, right? And how our bodies even react. And so being really mindful of that when you're around others, and same for intended parents, right? Why maybe this is not a time to be around people that are not uplifting and supporting me, and
Absolutely.
really connecting with those that maybe understand a little more, right? Maybe other intended parents that have, other intended parents, well, parents, right? Others that have gone through this and can understand. But there is that, right? Like, I shouldn't complain. I really wanted this. No, it's hard. It is
Yes.
hard.
It's hard.
Complain,
Yes.
call us.
Complain.
You
Yes.
can call us. We are here for you. It is
Yeah.
hard. Yeah, that's heavy to carry, for sure.
Yeah. I think that kind of goes into our next segment about support systems and having support systems in place for surrogates and for intended parents. And from your perspective, what does a healthy support system look like for intended parents and for surrogates?
Yeah, all the same, really, right? It's figuring out, I know at Giving Tree, you guys have support, like a support group for surrogates. Be involved, even if you don't think you need it, right? Just be there, be part of it. Because it's not so much about, I'm only going to seek help when I am struggling, but we want to connect with others before we struggle, because connection really decreases the chances of, like, depression and anxiety. And so that is important. How are we connecting? And we're not all of us are social beings and want to, chit chat all the time, but it is important. So whatever that may be, it may be a support group. It may be seeing your friends more often, seeing your family more often, if you have a partner, being very intentional about the time you're spending together. And also just like maybe educating those around you too, right? To feel supported, so that they fully understand. And then they're like, oh yes, I've heard, when I do the evals and the spouses come in, or the partners, I always ask, so and so came to you and said, hey, I want to do this. What was like your immediate reaction? And a lot of the time the partner's like, what? No, what is this?
Yeah.
But they'll say, but then we did our research together and we read about it, and sometimes the partners are super excited. And so that applies across the board, right?
Hmm.
Those that are around us, not a lot of people are educated in surrogacy, and so they don't really know how to support us. And so educating others may help. I know that can be hard for intended parents, but maybe on the surrogate side, to do that so that you feel more support there.
Hmm.
Uh, and same thing, right? Like we discussed about the intended parents, like they have already gone through a lot, and so really figuring out who helps me, who uplifts me, who understands me, and understands that although I am happy this is happening, I'm still scared and I'm fearful, or I can still like, or even, like you said, after birth, right? I'm a parent already, but this is hard.
Hmm.
And who can, sit with me and say, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Right. So, and therapy always
Therapy.
for
Therapy, and utilizing the agency, if the
100%.
surrogate or the intended parents are having a hard time, um, in it's not that they don't have support, but maybe they feel like their support isn't really stepping up enough, or they don't know enough. And so anytime that they need additional information or ideas, or anything, they can reach out to the agency. And that's one really big benefit of working with an agency like Giving Tree, because you have that case manager that has supported many journeys, and all of the staff that can speak to it from a personal standpoint or just experience in the industry alone. So,
Yeah.
so they're not alone.
I see some questions. I don't know if you want to do those at the end, or we can.
Yes.
Or,
Yes. We can kind of like pepper in some questions if you want, or we can do them at the end. Um,
works.
let's see. Yes, let's show this one. How can someone tell the difference between being emotionally ready for surrogacy and simply being excited about the idea?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good one. Excitement is in the moment, right? Like, let's do this. Let's get it started. Let's keep going. How let's do it quick. Um, and really figuring out, okay, am I ready for this? Is thinking about everything we discussed, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is really my motivation behind this? Like, why do I really want to do this? Um, am I okay with uncertainty? Am I okay with things going wrong and not knowing exactly what the next step may be, or what the next event may happen, right? Am I okay with
Mm-hmm.
that? Um, am I able to set boundaries? Am I able to advocate for myself, or tell somebody I actually don't like that, I'm uncomfortable doing that? So thinking about those things, right? Like when you start to think, oh, can I do all that? Or am I excited to help someone? Like, I'm just excited. This sounds great. Let's do it today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then, I would say, think about it. Do some research, right? Talk to an agency, talk to Giving Tree, and really, and maybe, talk to other surrogates too, hear about experiences so that you can really understand what the process is like and what it could be. Um, this is a long process, and so excitement will die out
Mm-hmm.
in terms of is it excitement, or is it that I really want to do it? Throughout the process there'll be these moments of excitement, right? Like I think you mentioned, like milestones and things of that sort, of course.
Mm-hmm.
um and am I doing this for myself? Like, am I doing this to fulfill something for myself, or to help someone else? So thinking about that, can I sit with the outcomes if it's not the desirable ones? Is that
Mm-hmm.
something I'm going to do?
Yeah. Um, There's another one. What's one thing you wish more intended parents understood about the emotional side of this?
Um, what's one more? Sorry, I was trying to look for the question, but I don't
Oh,
see it. Um, tell me again.
one thing that you wish more intended parents understood about the emotional side of a surrogacy.
That it'll be difficult. That it will be difficult, but it'll also be wonderful at the same time.
Mhm,
Um, it will. The path is hard, but the end is beautiful.
mhm,
And so, really, as hard as that can be for some to like envision, I would say that.
mhm.
Um, on the lighter side, I would say, a lot of surrogates do not want to keep your child. I know that when I worked with
Yeah.
intended parents, a lot of them would worry about that. Don't worry
Yeah.
about that. I've actually had surrogates worry that the intended parents won't come and pick up the baby. And so,
Yes, I have heard that too. Yeah. They
yeah,
they said, I don't want another child. What happens if they change their mind? And so we have the conversations with surrogates too, that we don't have intended parents that change their minds, and we don't have surrogates that want to keep the
yes,
baby. But
yes.
that is definitely top three, I think, for surrogates and intended parents to think, as a misconception.
Yeah, yeah, misconception,
Yeah.
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 But yeah, to intended parents is really it is hard, can and really uh, trying to trust the process, right? Try to trust the process as difficult as it may be. Um, yeah.
Yeah. For me, the after I carried twins, and after that experience, I have referred to it as like the highest high of my life. Even though I've had my own kids, it's just a different experience. And I found myself kind of chasing after the next
Yeah.
thing of, how do you top that in your life to go through this experience? And on a previous episode, we had an experienced carrier, and she was talking about, that's always her fun fact when she's in a new setting, and you have to say something interesting about yourself. She's like, I was a surrogate. She's pursuing her second journey now, and she's like, it always gets people talking, because not many people know someone
Yeah.
who had a surrogate carry for them or acted as a surrogate. So it's like a fun fact for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you use it as your that's amazing that you carried
Yeah.
twins.
Yeah, I do. I have no other fun facts. I'm like, I carry twins as a surrogate. I'm left-handed. That's like
I
pretty
love
much
him. Yeah,
it.
yeah. No, that's amazing. It's a superpower, right? And being
Yeah.
able to do that for someone.
Yeah.
Um, for sure.
I'll share another question. What should someone do if their family or partner is unsure about the process?
Education, for
Yeah.
sure, right? Education, education, education. That's really what
Mhm.
it comes down to. What I hear a lot is, your family and your partner, they love you. And so they're concerned for your health, right?
Yeah.
For what will happen to you. Um, and it's valid, right? It's a valid concern. And so really figuring out the way that your family or partner intakes information. For some people, they want stories or like actual, hearing from someone else that has gone through it, or some people want to
Mhm.
hear like data. Well, what does the data say, right? So figuring out how you can get that message, how you can educate your family and your partner on that. But I would ask too, right? Like, what makes you unsure about the process? What are the
Mhm.
concerns that you have? What are the questions that you have? And being more curious about why they're unsure.
Mhm. And even asking them, what would make you feel comfortable?
Yeah,
Is it talking to another
right.
partner that has supported his wife through a surrogacy journey? Is it talking to someone at the agency? Is it talking to the IVF clinic directly? What would make you feel comfortable with this?
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. I think that's it. The other questions, I feel like, we kind of went through
Yeah.
the discussion. So I think I will share the QR code one more time. If after listening to this, hopefully it has piqued interest in becoming an intended parent in our program at Giving Tree or as a gestational carrier in our program, you can scan this QR code or apply in the comments. There is a link that will take you to the application and be connected to a staff member.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining. And whether you're ready or still exploring, we're here to support you. And there will be a full replay of this available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And I just appreciate you joining and being candid and open and honest. And just I think it's beneficial for surrogates, especially to hear that it's not a scary process to be connected to Stephanie or another mental health professional for a surrogate screening or a psychological evaluation, whatever it is called. It's really just a beautiful, I think, step in the process and getting to know you and just being open and sharing. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful.